Welcome to My Business Matters, the Michigan Chamber podcast.
Welcome to My Business Matters, the Michigan Chamber podcast. I'm Jim Holcomb, President and CEO of the Michigan Chamber of Commerce and today's podcast host. Today we're going to be unpacking Michigan's fiscal year 26 budget, how we got here, key changes, and what it all means for employers and everyone living here in Michigan regarding taxes, roads, talent funding, and economic competitiveness. We have a great panel joining us today from the Michigan Chamber. Wendy Block is our Senior Vice President of Business Advocacy and Chief Lobbyist. Becky Burtka is our Vice President of Member Engagement and Overall Budget Lead. And Randy Gross, the Senior Director of Legislative Affairs and Associate General Counsel. Welcome all.
Thanks.
Well, it is budget time. We all talk about a budget around our kitchen tables, and the state has to do theirs. Becky, I'd like to start with you, just kind of, 30,000 foot level. What does it mean to be a fiscal year budget? And where is Michigan's budget right now? Where do we stand in numbers?
Yeah, so, official deadline for the budget is October 1st every year. That's when the fiscal year starts. So constitutionally, we have to have a budget every year. We saw the state legislature work through the machinations of creating a budget. We had a little bit of a stopgap budget there for about a week while they were still continuing negotiations, but they were able to pull it over the finish line and delivered about a $78 billion budget, which is
real numbers,
lower than last year. But I think the total number is still kind of in flux. It's going to account for policy changes that were made for different funding mechanisms, things that were happening at the federal level with the One Big Beautiful Bill and Medicaid changes. So some of that money was taken off the table. And then there were other policy changes that the state passed along the lines of road funding and things like that I know we'll get into a little bit later that will ultimately inflate the total number of the budget there. But
just in general, I think a lot of listeners probably think of a budget, you think of a spreadsheet or an Excel sheet in line. Is there a lot of policy that gets done in a state budget?
There can be. It depends on those individual line items. And I think this year was a little different in that there was a lot more policy that was coupled with the budget that then funds the budget. And I think that's where you see some of the difference in numbers.
Randy, should the average person care about a state budget?
Yeah. I mean, look, you don't know about it because it's happening in Lansing and kind of in the shadows to some extent for the regular person. But this is tax policy. This is, your tax dollars. This is what funds the budget. This is how you participate and engage with government and dictate priorities. And you should be reaching out to your local officials and explaining this to them and, stressing how you think the priorities of Michigan should be.
Do we think that happens enough? Are citizens getting engaged enough? I think we talk about it on other issues too, but really, as you say, this is your tax dollars. If you have a strong feeling, you should be raising your voice.
I mean, enough is a relative term. I mean, if you feel you're being heard, then I guess they're being engaged enough. I would argue that you could always engage more and have your opinion heard better and reach out to individuals and educate. I mean, the more conversation, the more transparency we put on things, I think the better off we all are.
Yeah, Wendy, we hear a lot, especially at budget time, a lot of political wranglings. There's a lot of news coverage. It's a little bit hard to follow. How did we get here, and was there anything really unique about this budget, or was it the same old, same old?
I think this budget cycle was unique in that we saw months and months and months of talk about putting the budget to bed, but yet tensions were extremely high. Details were quite slim. They missed this statutory deadline of July 1. They kicked it out to October 1 and then, in fact, passed this continuation budget for a week that they actually didn't even need to use the full week. And really, that was something that Lansing had never seen before, where the legislature actually didn't get a budget done, but the government didn't shut down. They found a way. Whether they actually had the legal authority to find this way is another question, but they found a way to kick the can down the road for a few more days while they worked out those final details. So I also think what was unique here was kind of who was on whose side as the budget went through. It started out as, Whitmer saying, I'm not going to sign a budget unless it includes road funding. Speaker Hall, a Republican, kind of teamed up with our Democratic governor to say, yep, I agree. I think road funding needs to be part of the budget deal. It looked like for months that they were in agreement on much more than they were in disagreement on. And then kind of at the end, the governor kind of seemed to pivot and to pick and side with the Senate Democratic leaders. So then it was Whitmer and Brinks against Hall. And in the end, I think Whitmer kind of locked arms with both on different things to get a final deal across the finish line.
Is any of that really surprising? That seems to be typical politics now, where everybody's pivoting and you're looking for your talking point, your tweet, your headline, and it seems like some of the policy falls by the wayside where, as Becky said, you want transparency, you want a lot of discussion. This seemed to be a lot about politics.
Yeah, 100%. And I think a lot of us who have been around this town for years felt like this budget process, maybe there just weren't as many details as there normally are available. Like up until the very end, we weren't even sure which revenue options were really on the table and which were serious or just kind of being talked about in the Lansing rumor mill.
Mm-hmm. And it seems to be budget. Is it normal? Does it usually fall on partisan divide? Is it the deal-making back room, and then everybody falls in line?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, yeah.
Yeah.
I would say up until a certain point. I think everyone plants their flag. You see that throughout the process when the individual chambers pass their own budgets, when subcommittees deliberate. But I think that, there's jockeying. And then at the very end, I think that deadline, that October 1 deadline, everyone works great under a deadline.
And that's constitutional?
Yeah, constitutional.
Well, and maybe just to build on that, initially it is partisan. I mean, we saw a budget come out of the House, and it came out on party line vote, right?
And I'm not even saying that's bad.
Right.
Becky said you plant your flag. That's what we're supposed to, or what we hope for, I think, is that everybody has their opinion, you debate it, and you do it out in the open, you have public hearings and go back and forth. That can be good process.
Well, I mean, I think there's a debate on whether it happened out in the open. I mean, the initial budgets, I think, happened, but, when we were looking to Wendy's comments and Becky's comments, as you got into the second half of this process and towards October, traditionally you would see conference committees from the various budgets getting together and discussing what was in there and what are priorities. And at the end of the day, we just saw two giant budgets that come out, one for school aid, one for the rest of government, and you had to shuffle through 600 pages, 700 pages?
Over 1,000, but who's
1,000
counting?
pages.
Is there any real negative aspect? Wendy, you made the point of kind of unique situation where they did a continuation budget. I think we know that's pretty prevalent and routine in D.C., but it's something new here. Is there any backlash to that? Is there any real lasting impact?
Well, I think the downside is the possibility that the legislature now sees us as an option or tool in their toolkit. And so every year, are we going to walk up, if not past this deadline? And concerns about, just what is going on in D.C. And if there are the votes on a continuation budget for a week, who's to say there aren't the votes for a 2-week continuation budget or a 3-week or a 3-month? And so I think it is dangerous in that this town seems, regardless of who's in control, they love to procrastinate, to walk everything up to the very bitter end, and that suddenly now this will become the new normal. This is not exciting. This is torture. Let's be honest.
One of the things we heard a lot about, even before this budget, we've heard it with this governor, and a lot of us have been advocating for road funding, and that was a prime component of this budget. How did we end up there?
Well, we ended up with road funding because the governor can't stop talking about fixing the damn roads and how she's going to fix the damn roads. And
do we have enough money to fix those roads?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like this is a real road funding plan insofar as the revenue actually comes through as promised, right? So the final budget kind of did a number of things, pulled a number of revenue levers to get to about $2 billion a year in ongoing funding for the road. So they shifted all of the collection of the sales tax at the pumps to dedicate all of that funding to roads. They backfilled the school aid fund, which is where that money had been diverted to. They also passed a wholesale tax on marijuana sales. There's a lot of questions about whether or not that tax base whether you can even do this because it was a citizen initiative that put recreational marijuana into place to begin with, and the legislature didn't get a supermajority vote on that on that
And
tax
that's
bill.
required if it's a citizen initiative?
Correct. So there's some ongoing litigation about that. So the question is, if the courts say, nope, legislature, you didn't have the ability to do this because you didn't get the required votes, there goes $400 million right down the drain. And so you're not looking at $2 billion. And then the final kind of piece of the puzzle was decoupling from the One Big Beautiful Bill tax credits and tax code. So that's about $677 million in year one, a little bit of a less impact years forward, but they believe that that gap will be made up by increased costs at the pump, and it will kind of still come out to $2 billion a year in the wash.
Yeah.
So,
Becky, on a process standpoint from a budgetary system, what happens if a tax like the marijuana tax, say the courts get involved, they say, hey, this was inappropriately levied. What happens in the budget when you have that hole then? How do they change spending, or do they have to go get new revenue? What does the legislature and the governor do?
Yeah, so a lot of times that money is built in what's called a contingency fund, and I'm not going to bore you with all those very granular details. But if the money doesn't come in and the money was allocated in the budget, then there is a hole. If the money doesn't come in, but it wasn't necessarily allocated, so there wasn't a line, but it was held in sort of a contingency fund, then you know, there's just less money going out to those roads, but it doesn't necessarily constitute a hole.
Yeah.
So
how much power
maybe
does
that's-
the governor or the legislature have during a fiscal year? So you've passed your budget, it's out there. How much can they just take from right hand and put in the left hand, or vice versa? Or is it pretty defined within the budget that this dollar has to be used for this purpose and that's it?
So it is very defined in the appropriations bill. If there's any changes that are going to be made, they need to be made through another appropriations bill. Those are usually called supplementals. Sometimes there are transfer requests that go through the legislature, but essentially any changes that need to be made need to be authorized by the legislature.
Okay.
So there is no push and pull behind the scenes now that the governor has, you know, $76 or $78 billion, and she can do whatever she wants with it now.
But there is flexibility. If they wanted to do a transfer, that's a legislative action where, okay, we're going to authorize you to take money from this pot and put in this pot. And
Yeah, but I mean, it's a pretty small budget so far, so I guess I don't know where the money would come from.
Yeah. Randy, Wendy kind of alluded to part of it in roads was new revenue, and we've heard and seen reported a lot of that money came from what's called decoupling. Can you help demystify that for our listeners?
Yeah, quickly. I mean, decoupling is the concept of separating from some of the tax reforms that recently happened at the federal level in July with the One Big Beautiful Bill. I know we're going to run a show that talks a little more in detail about decoupling, but the high level is there are about 5 different sections within the IRS code that were reforms done to encourage onshoring of manufacturing and growth. You know, just within the business sector and development and R&D and small business incentives. There was quite a few things, and the legislature and the governor chose to separate from those pieces. So at the end of the day, you will pay higher state income taxes because of that action than you would have had they not done that to fund.
So before this went through for a business, your state taxes, you started with the number from your federal taxes, and then you ran your state return.
Correct.
And now we're saying it's separated, so our business is going to have to file or kind of create two
You're
different...
going to have to do 2 separate bookkeeping, one that's kind of your federal returns and how you're going to do your federal taxes, and then you're going to have to back out all these various things that the state of Michigan will no longer accept, where historically they have followed the feds, and have a separate book to do your state taxes and what your tax liability is going to be there. And in your adjusted gross income, what everybody understands that term, if you're a personal, will be different whether it's taxed federally or taxed at the state level.
So listeners are definitely going to want to tune in to the future episode talking about that. For this specifically, how much money was involved, and is that what allowed the roads deal to get done?
Yeah, it was a big piece of it. I mean, it was what was deemed to be one of the easier targets, their words, on revenue. You know, roughly $600 million this first year, $500 and some the next year, and then it progressively goes down. But ultimately, at the end of the day, this will be an ongoing hit of probably $300 million or so. But I think our initial estimates, the next 5 years, businesses are going to see about a $2 billion hit to fund roads.
Wendy, how's that play out in the general kind of theme of this budget for our economic competitiveness? Obviously, we all need a good, strong, functioning government. We want roads to get done. You're looking at ways government needs to come up with a revenue stream. Was this the right way to do it? And what's the impact kind of globally in the big picture?
Yeah, we did oppose this just simply because we have concerns about the impact of decoupling and its how it will serve as a blow to Michigan's economic climate, our business climate, and just is this going to attract more investment or less? And we think the answer is less. The legislature decided that this was the easiest and probably most politically palatable way to put together this budget. And so we're trying to move forward and trying to find ways that we can continue to make Michigan's economic climate more competitive, whether that means recoupling at some point or finding other levers to pull. But Michigan needs to get serious about how, are we going to be a business attraction state?
Yeah, we got to be economically competitive. Becky, as we look forward, there's a lot of talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, but it seems like, it's kind of 2 against 1. If you think about it, everybody has their jersey on, your Democrat or Republican jersey. It was 2 against 1, and trying to get things across the finish line to really make lasting cuts in budget. Do we have a lot of lasting cuts, or is it more about maybe how the structure is happening right now?
I think a little bit of both. The structure was definitely unique this time, just, based on all the policy changes that were made and then some of those contingency funds that were built into the budget. So you see a smaller number top line because of that. But, the Republicans, when they passed their initial House budget, it was a hallmark of waste, fraud, and abuse cuts. And so one of the things that that did come out in the negotiation was a cut of approximately 2,000 ghost employees. So those are employees that aren't necessarily people, but they're positions that are filled.
They're slotted on a chart somewhere.
Yep, salaries are paid in the event that they would be positions that would be filled. And so the Republicans were successful in eliminating those and making sure that there isn't any additional money in those departments for any sort of transfer requests or things like that we just talked about. But so they did do a deep dive. I think they came away with some wins. But again, it's a negotiation, and it was 2 against 1. So, when you're looking at the budget as a whole, I think it's just that continue to chip away at some of those opportunities.
How much does one budget year impact the next? Do they start with a clean sheet of paper and rebuild the budget, or do you just kind of have your outline and here's what the state's funding and you have ongoing programs, and do we like that or not, and build it off that way?
That's a really good question. So
I thought so.
Well, you're the boss. So each year the governor proposes her own budget, and that's actually where everything starts. So a lot of times she starts with the budget from the previous year. There's ongoing funding that continues to, persist through each budget. There's a one-time funding that sometimes is let go because it really was intended to be one time. But the starting point truly is the governor's budget each year. And then you'll see the House and the Senate build their budgets off of that. So I think it's sort of a mix, depending on what the departments and the governor come together with. But you see a lot of the same things over
and depending
and
on the needs, I think every year we have a little something different. Wendy, you've worked in this town for several cycles. How has term limits impacted the budget process? Is it changing dramatically with people here maybe fewer years, or has it always just been the same?
Yeah, and now with our change to term limits, this will probably change again. But, right now we're in this moment where you have appropriations chairs who don't have a historical understanding of the budget and understanding of the process that goes into it. And so that puts people at a disadvantage kind of just immediately. They could be the smartest people in the room, but they just don't have the historical knowledge to really kind of go up against people who have been in town for 10, 15, 20 years. So this might stabilize with the extension of term limits and just this idea that you can specialize in one chamber or the other. You can decide to spend your full term just in the House or just in the Senate. So, this is an evolution, as with everything, and there's work to be done by outside groups like the Michigan Chamber to educate lawmakers about the importance of these things. I think we'll probably talk about going pro here, but that's one where we will continue to have to try to sell that, just because there are not people who were here when this first was set up and understand the value that it really brings to employers and employees alike.
It seems like the system, although they're co-equal branches of government, it seems like the governor has the upper hand in a budget.
Oh, 100%.
They get to not only start the volley, but then their departments are the ones that have all the line items and where the money's going to go and how it gets allocated.
Staff.
Yeah, just the knowledge base. It seems like it's going to be internalized into the departments much more than the legislature.
Right. The legislature has always kind of fought for unrolling of the budget, right? Taking these line items and really trying to get to a granular level of exactly where is each penny kind of going after they've allocated it. The governor's office has that information. They have that full accounting. And so, the legislature may say, but give us more, tell us more. They're never going to get the same level of details that the governor's office
And that
has
seems to be
access
whether it's Republican or
was gonna say-
Democrat.
100%.
That doesn't matter who's in the governor's office. When you're in the governor's office, you don't want to unroll anything. If you could
100%.
have a 3-line budget for every department, that's great.
Yeah. Randy, Wendy raised the topic of going pro. I know that's an issue that many of the business community kind of care about in the budgetary cycle. Can you give a little bit of overview of what that is, where the funding was, and where we ended up?
Sure. So Going Pro is a program that's housed within LEO. It's Labor and Economic Opportunity. Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. And this is a program that was actually designed by the business community and asked for by the business community. I think we're going on maybe 15 years now. And it's for retraining for skills and needs. So, it doesn't matter necessarily the sector. They're driving it saying, hey, we need more electricians, or we need more HVAC, or we need more freezer techs, or what, pick whatever the sector is they're doing. They're going out and driving, saying these are the demands of what we have to fill. And then they work with, it's a certified program. People, the employees will get certification. I think the numbers we saw is on average when an employee goes through this, they see about a 7 to 10% increase in pay. The employer gets a trained individual in a skill set that they need, and it's been a fairly successful program. The one thing I think that's unique on it is it's people talk about incentives and give out. This is a reimbursement program, so you have to do everything first. You have to cover the cost up front, and then you show that you completed it and you were successful. And then the company gets their reimbursement.
Well, and it seems like it's benefiting everyone. It's benefiting the employer because they're getting their employee. It benefits the employee. It also benefits state government because you keep somebody employed. It helps drive a community growth. That person's going to spend money, raise their family, stay here, whatever. That seems to be one of those programs, like you said. It's not just a handout. It's really a smart investment in Michigan's entire economic
Well, we think
system.
so. We've been big supporters and advocates for this program across the board because we've seen members across the state benefit from this program. Unfortunately, in the current budget, as part of the negotiations and cuts that were identified, the LEO department took a fairly significant cut, and one of those was to the Going Pro program, which I think resulted in roughly a 40% cut to their budget. This was a $50 million program, down to about a $30 million program. But to be clear, the demand was for about $100 million. We've been advocating an actual increase. So, the reality is it's going to be more competitive now. Employers are going to need to get in there and do this. In fact, there's 2 rounds of applications. The first one is happening by October 30th of this year. So that's the first round. Then the second round will be in the beginning part of the next year. They'll announce the dates. So we would encourage you, if you use it, get involved in it, fill out the application, and reach out and go.
And anybody listening, if they have questions, they can reach out to us at the Michigan Chamber. We can help kind of point them in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, you guys have taken a complicated subject, the budget. I want to go around the horn here for one last go around, though, before we finish, because we've kind of covered the cursory top of it, but it is a subject that gets into so many different areas. I just kind of want your 1 or 2 things that you're either concerned about, things you're going to be watching, things you're real happy with, something that the listeners should know. And Randy, we'll start with you.
Yeah. So look, my concern is that we need to make sure the state is going in a direction to be more attractive to businesses. And some of the actions taken in the appropriation process were not helpful. Between Going Pro, by decoupling, I think, we need to reprioritize in what we want to do as a state. And I think this is done by, obviously the chamber will continue to push these efforts, but also reaching out to your local elected official and explaining to them the importance of business. And this isn't big business. This isn't small business. This is businesses top to bottom in Michigan that need to advocate on behalf of themselves with their local officials so that they know that they're there and put a face with those businesses.
Yeah, which seems to be the best way to communicate a lot of issues. We need to put a face on it. People need to be engaged, whether it's a personal issue, a business issue, an organizational issue.
Yep.
Legislators need to hear from you directly.
Exactly.
Becky, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'm a process person, so I didn't love what happened from a continuation budget perspective and all of those things. And, Randy definitely hit what I wanted to say, too. From a member engagement perspective, I think this was a budget that the business community saw a lot of impact to businesses in the budget and in the budget process and the policies that ensued. And so just making sure that, as the Michigan Chamber, we continue to engage our businesses and our members and that community at large to understand what the budget is and understand that it does impact them, because this one definitely did. But, from a process perspective, just making sure that we don't go the way of DC and that we're working together and that, that there is a process that we're following and that these continuation budgets don't become a new norm.
I think it is important to remember, though, your point, we aren't DC. You can have differences here, but by and large, we're holding to a process that's going to benefit everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wendy, you're back in cleanup.
Okay. I'm going to take a different take. I am just interested to see where do we go from here, right? This was a really long and contentious process. But even just kind of going into the budget fight, there were only 13 bills signed into law before October 1, the date that the budget got finalized. Now there have been 30 bills that signed into law. So actually 17 out of the 30 were actually budget bills. And, can this legislature find agreement on other things, important things moving forward for our state? So coming out of the budget, there was a lot of discussion about finding a replacement for economic development programs, which got slashed in the budget. It will be interesting to see if they can actually find agreement on that and pass some legislation or do other things more this year and going into next year, which will be contentious already because it's political season. So I'm just more interested. No, not really, but I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah. Well, with that, we are out of time. A very special thanks to Wendy, Becky, and Randy helping us break down Michigan's fiscal year 2026 budget. Thanks to all of you for listening. Please subscribe or like our podcast for easy notifications. And for more information about Michigan's budget or any other policy issue, please reach out to the Michigan Chamber or visit us at michamber.com.